Oggi vi porto con me in una gita fuori porta da Milano a Venezia per incontrare una delle mie autrici contemporanee preferite, ovvero Elif Batuman. Sì, ho anche scoperto che questa è la pronuncia turca corretta del suo nome. In teoria dovevamo stare con lei soltanto mezz'oretta, quindi mi ero preparata tante domande, ma con la consapevolezza che non avrebbe potuto rispondere. Ma in realtà poi lei è stata con noi ore e ore. Non ero preparata né così tanto attrezzata. Spero che comunque apprezziate il fatto che ho chiesto tantissime cose sul suo processo di scrittura, non soltanto sui libri dell'Idiota e di Out Out. Infatti potete ascoltare tranquillamente tutta la chiacchierata senza aver letto i romanzi, anzi probabilmente vi ispirerà questa chiacchierata con Elif per iniziare a leggerli. Non ci sono spoiler, quindi ascoltate tranquilli. Perdonerete anche il mio inglese, ma potete attivare i sottotitoli sia in italiano sia in inglese in modo tale da poter capire perfettamente. A proposito di trascrizione, se volete l'intervista condensata in forma scritta, vi ricordo di iscrivervi alla mia newsletter Inside Books. Se non avete 40 minuti da dedicare del vostro tempo ad ascoltare la voce di Elif e la mia, lì potete leggere tutto con tranquillità. Tutti i link sono in descrizione come sempre, insieme ai link di affiliazione e tutti i miei social. Adesso non posso che augurarvi buona visione. There is a moment in The Idiot, if I'm not mistaken, and Céline is at the restaurant, and maybe she's abroad, I don't know, maybe in Paris, and she chooses something from the menu, but she doesn't know what it is, and the waiter comes back with a cantaloupe full of Porto or wine, and she doesn't know how to eat it. I thought, that's it, that's the essence of the book. Language is a trap. Lots of misunderstanding and contradictions, but it's fine. One thing that I really like about Céline as a protagonist is the fact that she let things happen to her. Mm-hmm. And she's very brave in her unique way. Mm-hmm. Everything is awkward in somehow, but she let things happen to her.
Oh, that makes me really happy. Thank you so much.
But how do you pronounce Céline?
In Turkish it's Selin, but I thought that I wanted her to have a name like my name that's pronounced by different ways by different people, so I think it's all okay.
It's all okay.
Yeah.
But in Turkish should be Selin.
Yeah.
I have lots of questions for you.
Oh my gosh.
Don't worry, because
it warms my heart to see the notebook with all the writing.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
I always take notes about the books that I read. This one is new.
So old school.
Yeah, very old school, because I don't have a great memory, so I had to take notes.
That's what books and writing are for. So
Yeah,
you don't have to hold the stuff in your poor
I
coconut.
envy the fact that you have this. Actually, it seems like you have this access to your past self, and
Because I was always writing like.
you take a journal?
Not anymore, but I did when I was that age. Yeah, I'm 46 now, so it was a very long time ago that.
Oh, so in order to write the books, you reread your journals?
I did, yeah. So The Idiot, I actually wrote the first. I wrote the text of The Idiot very long time ago in the 2000, 2001, 2002, and then I edited it when I was in my early 20s then, and I went back to it when I was in my late 30s, and so at the time that I wrote it, I had all of the emails, I had my diaries.
Oh,
and,
fantastic!
Yeah.
Lots of materials.
Yeah.
Well, it feels like you are some kind of historian from your past. Is it strange?
It was strange because when I wrote, I was 23 and I was writing about this thing that happened when I was 18, but I didn't think of it as history. I thought of it as, open-ended reality. Mm-hmm. And then when I went back to it at age, I was like 38 or something, or 30, something like that. And I realized it's a historical novel already. Like I didn't have to do anything, and time just made it into a historical, because with the email and just everything had changed. I think things just changed very fast.
Yeah, but about that, even Sally Rooney received a lot of criticism because she uses emails for her novel, and everyone said no millennial will use email for conversations. But I hate that kind of criticism, because that's not the point. I mean, the point is not just...
I mean, Sally Rooney's like 20 years younger than me.
No, yeah, I know, but that's the point. The technology that you use for the conversation, but it is how technology changed the conversation overall.
Oh yeah.
So that's just a device. I think that's just the plot device that she uses, and it's email. Now you use another system that I think it's something that it was
Free webmail, yeah.
yeah, it was something about the communication between students in the university, and I don't know anything about it, but it's okay. It doesn't matter if the technology is different. It's not social, it's not email, it's something else, but doesn't matter, because the point is that the conversation changed and technology changed relationship.
Yes.
So I think that's the point.
Oh, that's a good point.
My question for you is, why sometimes writers are scared of describing technology in their novel, because they are scared to be obsolete?
That's a great question. I think part of it is that, part of it is, I think especially as you get older, the reason that you become a writer is because you love reading, and in some way you're always writing in conversation with the books that you've read. So it's in a way, it's hard to write about things that you haven't read about already. So if the technology is very new, it almost feels like it's not the correct subject for literature, and it takes like a extra imaginative effort to do it. It was something very recent, and I was wondering whether to mention it, and it almost seemed like, oh, is this too sort of like local and parochial that other people won't understand it because it's too new? I think there's a feeling that some time has to pass before something like passes into literature. But I think that you're right, that it's better to not be like that and to just sort of keep an open book, because you don't know what's going to make it and what's not. So I think the best way would just be to write everything the way that you're actually experiencing it.
Yeah, like you feel in that moment, what you feel in that moment. Yes, and another thing about Celine is that she feels a lot.
She does.
Yes.
Big feelings.
And she's like, do you think that we lose, when we grow old, we lose that kind of naturalness in observing things, even absurd things, but just that, like I said before, she let things happen to her. And I don't know, the feeling is that when we grow old, that braveness just pass.
Yeah, I've been thinking, that's another wonderful question. I've been thinking about that so much. There is a story that happens, and so we're all expecting that to happen, and then it does kind of happen. But one thing that was attractive about writing those books was I found I was able to access those feelings, and they sort of they kind of bled into the present a little bit too. And I was just, I don't know, part of the project for me was to recover that kind of feeling and to see if it's still possible to do. And I think it is. I think that a lot of the sort of deadening that we go into is it's sort of socially conditioned, and that we could stay alive and open much longer. It's also, I think, you get hit with a lot of disappointment, so it's hard to, I think at the time when Céline is still, that openness to go everywhere and to, oh, maybe this person suggested to go there, I guess I'll just go there and I don't know what's going to happen. After a certain, if she's doing that for 20, so now I'm writing about actually Céline in her 30s and 40s is what I'm working on now. Yeah. But so
happy.
After you've done it a few hundred times, you no longer expect that something very surprising is going to happen, and it becomes a little bit of a cognitive effort to still keep that kind of openness. But I think that's one of the fights that's really valuable to fight, and that's a project that I'm thinking about a lot.
I was looking for a description that Celine made about herself, and it's I am like a flaneur in the hallways.
Earlier in the book, Céline criticizes the idea of flaneur. She's annoyed at literary studies, and she's like, ugh, all they're going to do is say that somebody's a voyeur or flaneur and act as if it's interesting. And then there's that oppressive song with the Fiona Apple lyrics about walking in the hallway, and she feels oppressed by that. That might be something that the Italian translator did, is to tie that back to the flaneur, but there's definitely that line about walking in the hallway.
Yeah, but it's beautiful because for me it reflects the real nature of Céline, because she's not a canonical intellectual. Even if she is a freshman year in literature at Harvard, and of course she is a brilliant mind, she has this curious and clever gaze on her reality, but she is not scared of show her emotional vulnerability. Instead, sometimes with such characters that they use dry humor and irony, the problem is that maybe they are they feel a little pretentious or distant from readers. Instead, Celine, she's not scared. Like I said before, she's not so scared of her feelings. I think her journey is towards a real authenticity. And
She's also mistrustful of authority. I think it's like in order to be the actual intellectual, you have to think that the thing that everyone thinks is important is actually important, and she's always sort of thinks that, oh, what if that thing is bullshit? And
yeah, in fact, at one point, she's astonished because even at Harvard,
Yeah.
people believe in the kind of idea of future about getting married and having kids. And she's like, no, even here.
Even here.
Another point is that, of course, the books are set in the 90s. So there wasn't that kind of vocabulary that now we are used to address with feminism. But at one point we feel like a different tone, like the Celine, the narrator, has more knowledge and more awareness than Celine, the protagonist of the story. So how did you manage that double conscious?
wow, you're a wonderful reader. I feel so lucky to get
Thank you
to
so
meet
much.
you.
I told you so.
Yeah, is this a was it an either or in The Idiot or in both?
More
of them?
in
More
either or.
right? That was why I didn't plan to write either or. So I published The Idiot, and then I went on tour with it, and I was having conversations like this, and that was in 2017, and it was the year of Trump in the United States and the year of Me Too, and a time when a lot of women were, the Harvey Weinstein thing happened, and in 2018, while I was here actually in Mantova at the book festival, there was a thing with this Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who was accused of assaulting this woman years ago. So it was a time when this conversation was changing, and a lot of women were going back in the past and retelling the story of their experience using different vocabulary that we didn't have then. And then it became this interesting puzzle for me, because actually this vocabulary existed for a long time. Like, I think rape culture or patriarchy, like people use those terms, feminists use those terms, I think in the 70s, certainly by the 90s, but if I heard it, I didn't pay attention, I didn't think it applied to me, and it was really only in 2017 that I was like, oh my gosh. And I also, at that time, I was in a new relationship with a woman for the first time after dating men for my whole adult life, and so I was reading second wave feminism, and I was reading queer theory. I grew up during the Cold War with this idea that, in the Soviet Union, people write political literature, communists write very political literature, and I'm on the side of ideas. I'm more interested in art than in politics, and I'm interested in literary merit, and those things are completely separate. So I sort of came to this point where I felt that actually The Idiot was a book about depoliticization. It was about how Céline chooses love and literature over politics. It's not stated very clear. There's a few places in where I could see it, but I thought I didn't make it very clear to myself, and let alone to other people. So that's why I decided to write a sequel where I wanted to make it explicit that these different, like feminism is there, and she just doesn't think it's that. She doesn't think it applies to her. I had her have a conversation with Svetlana where she's like, why don't we just become lesbians? And Svetlana's like, no, here's why. And she's like, oh, you're right. It's stupid. Never mind. So I wanted to show all of the, because nobody, even if you're brainwashed, you don't think like, oh, I'm being brainwashed. You think I'm choosing freedom. I'm choosing the most exciting thing. So I wanted to remember and reconstruct that. At some point, I thought there was going to be two parts. One part would be the novel that would set a historical novel set in the 90s, and the other half would be from the perspective of me at the time of writing, so in the 2020s, and I would be sort of it would be sort of an essay explaining about how novels ruined my life. So it was going to be like either or, like half and half, and that novels actually depoliticized me and put me on this heteronormative course that led me into harm. But I had trouble with the essay half. It sounded too sort of lecturing, and it became sort of more interesting to try to get that content into the novel, but without actually using those phrases. So there's a couple of places where I don't know, where I'm hoping that the smart reader like you will use those words that they know, but that Céline doesn't know yet. And at the end, I have that little, I don't know if it's in the Italian one, but there's a list of books that, and there you can see that the Céline who is experiencing the book isn't the same as the person who wrote the book. But yeah.
By the way, that's exactly what I did.
Oh my gosh. Wow, that's so cool.
Are you aware that book spotting is something that is trending on social media?
Oh my gosh, no, I'm not.
Basically, you make a list of every title
Wow.
that you encounter in
Oh my God,
books,
like the birds,
films.
yeah.
Exactly. And that's
So
what
cool.
I did with The Idiot.
Let me stop you for a minute. She last year had a book club about how can we say it in English, like Russian mattoni, Russian bricks.
Oh wow.
Russian
Because they are
bricks.
they're big.
Oh, so cool.
And it's most of it's in your book.
Oh, fantastic.
I share
the
Sorry
brick
for
collection.
interrupting, but it's
Oh yeah, that's so cool.
I share deep love for Russian
that's so
literature
nice.
with you, with Céline. I totally agree with you because the entire second part of the book for me is the attempt of Céline to deconstruct romantic heterosexuality, let's call it that way, but not in itself, but the idea that somehow romantic love and sex are the climax of your life. And of course the second part is this is about the description of her sexual life, and it's not the climax of her life. Maybe the point of either or, with the reference to Kierkegaard and the radical choice between aesthetic life and ethic life, is the fact that maybe life is not about living aesthetic lives, but it's aesthetic experiences. But actually, for Céline, in my opinion, the learning part, the most significant part, is the living awkward moments. In fact, another thing that I want to tell you is, what is awkwardness for you, and why is that so important in your books?
That's so funny. I wrote an essay on awkwardness once. I should send that to you.
Oh, really? For me, awkwardness is when a moment should go in a certain way,
Yeah.
and the expectation that you
Yeah.
have about a moment, and then how that moment actually goes.
Yeah.
And for me, that's awkwardness. How do you translate that feeling in Céline's life?
That's a wonderful, wonderful question that I've never actually, despite having written an essay on awkwardness, I've never really thought about. I mean, when you put it that way, it feels like, I feel like the genre of the novel, I mean, or the tradition of the novel, for me starts with Don Quixote, which was really big for the Russians too, and it's all about an expectation that your life is going to be a certain way, and it's going to be sort of like elevated and grand, and you're going to go out and you're going to kill a giant and rescue some lady, but actually you go out and there's a windmill and you crash into it, and then you sort of hurt yourself, and then you have to like walk back. And I think awkwardness, it has, the novel is about that disjuncture, and about, there's something very alive in the moment of awkwardness. The time sort of expands. You're very conscious of like you collide with the windmill, and then you have to somehow get back to your horse and get on it, and it's somehow, there's a lot of humor in it and a lot of solidarity, and a way that time slows down. I don't know, so Viktor Shklovsky, the Russian formalist, talks about art, what makes a piece of writing literary, and he says it's about defamiliarization, so it's about actually slowing down perception, that what happens with words and with language is we hear them and they become sort of dead to us. They don't actually make us feel anything anymore. You hear a black dog and you think, oh yeah, but you're not really imagining what a black dog is. And literary language is like making the stone stony again, like making you actually, by describing it in some surprising way. And I think that there's something about, and part of that is to prolong the moment of perception, to not have it just rush by in this deadened way. So it's sort of related to mindfulness, but I think awkwardness does that in a way, because it's like, you can't just sort of keep going as if nothing happened. You're stuck in that moment, and you have to sort of like maneuver through it. And in a way, those are the moments when one feels really alive. Like the epigraph to The Idiot is from Proust, where he talks about how, at this particular time in our lives of adolescence, it's so humiliating. We would do anything to take back those moments, but those are the only times when we learn anything. It's like, I think that could be a little bit about the awkwardness of being young, where you don't, the formulas aren't in place yet. There's still some opportunity for things to go differently, and there's something very alive in that.
Yeah, and we get back to Celine's naturalness in accepting that things are just absurd and fundamentally absurd. And speaking of writing and the definition of novel, I've recently read a book that I've noticed has some similarities with your books, which is Les Faux Monnayeurs by André Gide.
Oh my gosh!
It's very meta-literary, and the book is...
I read that years ago, yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Years ago.
And of course, the book is about being young, being a student, and most important, being a writer. There is this description of the novel as a lawless genre. And I think it is a paradox, of course, because even if the novel is this borderless country where you can do whatever you want in terms of writing style, plot, or characters development, structure, so on. At the end, André Gide said that writers are too afraid, so they tend to be more orthodox in the novel, more conventional. Maybe because they are scared.
I need to reread that. Yeah, that's a
beautiful, beautiful book. I think it's more an essay than a novel, and that's my question for you. Do you care about how your books are labeled?
That's a great question too. I always loved reading novels, and I was very more than reading nonfiction, more than reading essays, and I knew I wanted to be a writer. And the books that made me feel better about life were novels, and that's what I wanted to do for other people. So it was very clear to me that what I wanted to write were novels. Then I finished college, and I could tell that I couldn't just get a novel published tomorrow. So I went to graduate school, and because they pay you so that you teach, and it's like a fellowship, and you don't have to think about your life for a few years. And then I started doing some writing there and trying to get short things published. And I thought of everything that I wrote as being part of a novel or part of a story. And I couldn't get anything published as fiction because in the US at that time, this was sort of pre-autofiction, and there was an idea that if it was fiction, it had to not be. So I had editors actually tell me, no, we can't, I wrote something that I thought was a short story, and then they were like, no, we're going to publish this as an essay. And I was like, but it's a short story. And they were like, well, but it's clear that this person, it's about a Turkish-American person who studies Russian literature. That's obviously you. It talks so much about books. It follows a train of thought more than it follows a plot. And I was like, what's the difference between a plot and a train of thought? I don't know. For me, there was something important about, about thinking of what I was doing as being a novel. There was something sort of, dutiful and boring and flattening about the idea of writing essays and about writing nonfiction, but I couldn't control it. So my first book is a nonfiction book, it's essays, even though I sort of wanted to write it as a novel. And then just the publishing landscape changed, and Sheila Heti and Ben Lerner and all these people in the US started doing this stuff, and then it became, now it's easy to publish. Everyone is writing novels that are clearly about themselves. I am getting to the point where what I'm writing now, it's so much about ideas, and it's so much about reading and my train of thought, and even more so than those books are, that I've actually been thinking maybe what I'm writing now is going to be an essay and not a novel. And then I started to think, well, what does that actually mean to me? And I'm not sure. It's because so many novels are kind of, I don't know, War and Peace, half of it is essays. How much of Proust in Search of Lost Time is that essays? So I'm not sure what that distinction means. But at the moment, I just went to Siena because I'm at this fellowship in Rome where it's there's like a lot of social life, and it's hard to be alone with your thoughts. So I went to an Airbnb and I sat there and I was like, in the vortex of my horrible thoughts, and I thought, oh my gosh, the thing that's going to make this possible to write because it's actually an essay, or it's a series of essays, and it's not. And that somehow felt freeing. I guess it's just about, as a writer, what makes you feel free and enabled and alive and energetic, and then you have to do that. And then whatever abstract thought one has about genre is something separate from that, or afterwards, or maybe that's for other people to think. Yeah.
Absolutely. And for me, and then I'm gonna let you eat, but maybe before there was a prejudice about writing autofiction.
Yes,
because it's something that happened to you,
Yes.
so you don't have the merit for it. You were just lucky.
Yeah.
Instead, if you invent everything, then you are more valuable writer.
I've been thinking about that a lot. Where did that idea that novels have to be fictional come from historically? There's like, you can trace it back to, there's some stuff about like libel where people didn't want to get sued, so they would change stuff. And then I think that the kind of Cold War stuff of like, I'm not a mere transcriber, I transform into literature. I'm not just a secretary. I actually think there's sort of an anti-democratic agenda that was served by this stuff, which was sort of like, well, not everyone, a very small part of it's still the case that only a small privileged percent of the world population can be a writer, but it's at least a little bit bigger than it was before. It used to be you had to, have a certain amount of money, you had to be a man, you had to, and I think that group of people, to explain why it was that they're allowed to, I think Henry James actually thought about this a lot in the prefaces. He talks about, in the preface to Portrait of a Lady, which Céline reads at the end of Either Or, he's talking about how he gets the idea for Portrait of a Lady from a woman who he sat next to at a dinner party, but of course that's just the germ of the idea, and then he has to take it away and abstract it into something else, and that's where the real work of creation is. And I think that a big part of the idea of like novel writing is about creating this, like, it's not just taking reality, because then anyone could do it. It's like some special artistic transformation, and that sort of justifies keeping it in this elite space, which it was kept in for a long time. It's a question I think about a lot, but I don't really have a good answer for it. The books that I read were always novels, and then I went to graduate school to study novels, so I was reading all of these novels, and then when I started to write and to try to get published, I was sort of pushed into this narrative nonfiction, because that's sort of where the energy was, and there was this idea that it was sort of, it was also, it felt a little bit gendered, like there was something a little bit more interesting to men about narrative nonfiction, that you could get men to read things that they wouldn't read otherwise if they thought they were going to learn some facts. Like with The Possessed, I remember saying I just want to write a novel that recaps Dostoevsky's Demons at a Stanford literature program, and I was basically told, no one wants to read a novel about depressed Russian literature grad students, but you've read all these Russian books, people wish they'd read them, but they're very long, they take a long time, and you're funny, so if you write a short book where you sort of describe what a lot of them are about, then people will feel like they've read the books, and then they'll feel smarter, and that's a book that people will pay money for, which to me seemed kind of cynical, and also like, why can you only learn from a nonfiction book and not from a fiction book? But I didn't have, I was in my 20s, and I didn't have a ton of choices. And my kind of first break as a writer was getting to write for The New Yorker, and that was not fiction, it was narrative nonfiction. So that was where the opportunity was, I guess. I'm interested in external things, like I'm interested in the world also, so it kind of made sense, and I got to go to some cool places and do some reporting.
What profoundly resonates with me about Céline is the way she uses books and literature to process her life. In fact, she doesn't want to extrapolate objective meaning from books. And I don't know if you will confirm this idea or not, but my idea of Céline is that her main driver is the unknown. The necessity to understand the world, like the entire world is a mystery, and she has to collect all these clues, together all the pieces. And I don't know if even the deep love that she feels for Russian literature is because of this reason, because maybe as a person who is not Russian, maybe she doesn't understand everything about that culture. Maybe she thinks, okay, it's fascinating that I don't understand.
It's more mysterious. Yeah, I think that's really true. One response that I got to my books that surprised me from some religious people was that these are actually very religious books, because they're about looking for the meaning of life in some external texts and applying those, and that the kind of thinking where you're trying to make everything correspond to something in a book is a kind of religious thinking, which was very foreign to me because I grew up in a very secular, like politically, in Turkey in a certain generation, my parents are scientists, and I grew up with no religion whatsoever, and the idea that there's nothing beyond this. They're both doctors. They went throughout Turkey, and they were going to, for their medical training, and they were treating people who didn't have access to antibiotics, and they were seeing these needless deaths and horrible suffering due to hygiene and all these conditions. And it really seemed like improving the world was a matter of spreading science and spreading education, and then all of these things were going to sort of take care of themselves. And I grew up believing that, and I grew up believing that material problems were more important than all of my problems, which were not material problems. I had the penicillin. My problems were all, what does it all mean? But I think I was always looking for some sign that there's more, that there's more than just this table, that it means something, it's here for some reason. There's I think I was always looking for some spiritual dimension, and I found that in novels. And I think that one reason I was attracted to the Russian novels was also because they were, I don't know, maybe this is not so interesting, but they were...
There is this religious dilemma, existential crisis. Absolutely. Those are themes in Russian literature.
Yeah, and they're treated almost as seriously as science. Like I grew up thinking that all of my problems are nothing compared to starving people and poor people. But the Russian novels were something. Like they were even doctors cared about them. And
there is nothing more religious in Russian novels than philosophy.
Yeah. It's also because I think the time when you're 18 and 19 and 20, so much happens in a year, and then by the time you're 30, time is moving much more quickly, and 40 even more quickly, and I guess it just gets faster and faster. So it picks up. She's finished college, and she's moved to California for graduate school, and she takes some time off from graduate school to try to write about this thing that happened to her with Ivan, but she thinks that it can't be too autobiographical, or else it won't really be a novel. She has to invent stuff, and it has to have some kind of historical significance. And in the end, she ends up writing a novel about the Salem witch trials in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, where they burned this, or not burn them, but and then she's like, how did that happen? And then she ends up going back to school. So it's written in little pieces, and it also has more of me now, like me at age 45 writing about it is she's in the book. And I'm trying to play with different forms, and I'm hoping to go up to, she's in her early 40s. I think I want to go up to her 40s.
Well, I can wait. I can wait. And I find it incredible, profound, the fact that Ivan is not so present in this book. Lots of readers said that Ivan is a very ambiguous person, a very despicable figure. But I don't think so, because I think it's Celine's gaze that project on Ivan all the things that she doesn't understand about herself, about the relationships. So I find that Ivan is like everyone else. I mean, he's like a guy.
He's just a guy, yeah, exactly. That's where I arrived also.
So I appreciate the fact that now she's gonna find herself by herself without just understand everything about Ivan.
Yeah.
There is no...
He doesn't have the answer.
Yes.
He doesn't have it.
And she will never have, but it's okay.
Yeah, totally. It was kind of a... So for the audiobook, they usually have an actor read. For some reason, the nonfiction books, the author reads, and the novels, the actor reads. But I don't know. I ended up reading it myself for The Idiot, and there was a part of it where there was a director who was giving me instructions, and he was. So I had to read all of Ivan's lines, and there's one, like near the end of The Idiot, there's a conversation where she's at his parents' house, and they stay up late at night, and they're having this conversation. And his lines to her, I had to read it was easy for me to read Celine's lines and to read the book because it's very much my voice, but I had a really hard time reading him. And the director was like, well, what do you think that Ivan is thinking here? And I realized that I hadn't thought about, even though this was based on a real experience, for the years of my life, all I thought I was thinking about was, what is this guy thinking? But actually, I hadn't thought about what it was like to be him and to see this other person, and how is he relating to that person? And then the director was like, what do you think that he's thinking? And I was like, I don't know, what do you think that he's thinking? And like, he said, I think he's ashamed. And that hadn't occurred to me. And it was a really intense experience.
Celine develops a different idea of literature and how to write books during her journey. And I remember that she said at the beginning that, I'm going to quote, it felt shameful to be so unartistic and self-obsessed to not want to invent richly fictional characters. But then something changes. What changes? Because at the end she wrote the books that we are reading somehow.
Yeah. I mean, in real life, that change happened much later. I mean, for me, the way it happened was kind of through years of therapy, through reading Proust. So I learned a lot of things from Proust, but I think I actually had to go to psychotherapy before I could understand Proust, because that's not true. I understood Proust already in graduate school, but I tried to read Proust as an undergraduate, and I couldn't tolerate the parts about childhood because so I gave that experience to Céline because I wanted to show that that's sort of a door that could open to something, and it doesn't open then. So I think of either or as like all the doors that didn't open. And with Proust, he talks about the book as a machine for the reader to see themselves, and that's why they don't all work for the same people. And the author's sort of like creating this thing and is like, here, now try it, now you look in it. And then you look in it and it's like a kaleidoscope and you actually see yourself. So all of the whole thing of, is it self-absorbed or is it about the other person, that distinction is actually not that. I don't know, I guess I've learned this from meditation also, that there's an idea that if you meditate, that's very self-absorbed because you're just sitting there saying, doing nothing and doing nothing about world suffering. But actually, when you meditate, it actually increases your empathy. And this is something that I've experienced because you learn about the processes of your own thinking and the kind of all the suffering and pain that goes on, and it makes you understand other people's reactions, and it makes you able to sort of like pause. So I think that, I don't know, a lot of my getting older or growing up for me, which sounds weird to say after age 20, but that was what it was realizing that I'm not that different from other people, which is a hugely important thing for writers to realize, is that when you describe all the intricate things of yourself, you're doing it for someone else so that they understand themselves through it. So it doesn't really make sense to talk about it being self-absorbed. I mean, the thing that's self-absorbed is if you to me, it's if you, just invent something that has no bearing on it. I don't even know what's probably nothing self-absorbed.
No, but because writing is something that comes from the inside, and it is always for the outside.
Yeah, that's the paradox, right? I teach writing now, and it's like, to what extent is it self-expression, and to what extent is it communication? Like, you do write in some way for yourself. If it was just for other people, it wouldn't feel meaningful. It would feel like homework. It would feel like a job. But if it was just for yourself, you wouldn't bother writing it down. And like, it's so much work. It's so unpleasant. You didn't think that someone was going to see it.
I assume you receive tons of questions about autobiographical elements in your books. How much of yourself you put into Céline's characters, how much of your life.
It's interesting. I mean, you wonder, right? Like, I understand why people ask that. In some way, it's important, and then in some other register, it's not important. It's interesting.
Yeah, but I would like to ask you if, I don't know, it's something that it annoys you somehow, that people want to know everything about your life.
No, it doesn't annoy me. It seems kind of natural, because when I'm reading other people's writing, especially when there's some kind of gesture towards transparency, like, I don't know, Rachel Cusk or Sheila Heti, I do wonder like how many of those things really happen. I guess I don't feel like I actually have to find out. Like, I don't know that I would ask them, but it is somewhere that my mind goes to. I think that the times when I do feel uncomfortable, because I made a decision to become a writer, to be sort of a public figure, and also to write about autobiographical material. But how do you write about yourself without writing about other people? None of those people made that decision, and that's the most, I think, talking about like the ethical and the aesthetic. That's the most difficult part for me about writing, is how to write about my own experience without compromising other people or writing things that people are going to not like. And at the same time, I think...
Well, I think that's the ethical choice.
Yeah, that's the ethical choice, and I think you have to do it each time.
But I think you made a brilliant job because, I don't know, if I were one of your characters, I would never get offended.
Well, thank you, but you never know. You know, because everyone tells their story about themselves, and the story that you write is... It's my story, you know, it's not their... It feels strange, you know, sometimes people write about me too, and it feels weird. And I have my own books where I get to write whatever I want, but I do feel... It does feel very unfair and one-sided for people who aren't writers. They don't get to tell their side of the story. When I was thinking about why are novels fictional, I was reading some psychoanalytic theories, and they're basically like this psychoanalyst, Alice Miller. She wrote analyses of, she wrote a lot about Kafka, she wrote a little bit about James Joyce and Proust, and for her, basically, the places where they become fictional are places where they're trying to protect their parents. They're trying to protect some idealized version of their parents or of authority or of something else. And I do have the feeling that novels don't reflect reality in some way. There's some censorship operation, and it's based on shame, and it's based on ideas like, you know, we don't show our dirty laundry, and this is like, you're not allowed to say this and you're not allowed to say that. And everyone's kind of ashamed of the same things, and there's sort of, and I do think shame is very toxic, and that especially if everyone does it, then why should anyone feel ashamed? Everyone should just, so I do feel like politically, I think the erosion of that shame is going to be a good thing, but you know, it's hard. I think it's hard for me to decide I'm going to be on the vanguard of eroding shame, and then, you know, I don't know, what about my ex-boyfriend maybe didn't want to be on the vanguard of
No, I know, but I think that's the role of writers.
Yeah.
Because I think Philip Roth said that dirty laundry is a writer's business.
Yeah.
In The Idiot, there are plenty of books that Celine is reading, but there are some titles that you wish you had put into it, the novel, and you couldn't.
I mean, I didn't think about what books to put into it. They just sort of came up. If anything, I'm a little bit embarrassed about having so many books, so I think if I could think of some to take out, I would probably do that.
No, as you can see, that was
Is there
one
something
of the...
that you think is missing? Are there books
No,
that you wish were there?
absolutely. And I was... I know it's selfish, but I was very proud because I almost read every book
gosh,
on the list.
That's amazing.
No, I find it interesting because, you know, usually your favorite books characters, yeah, of course they are readers, but not always, but most of the time they are readers, but they don't tell you what they are reading.
It's frustrating, right? I always want to know. Why do they hide it?
Exactly. So it was reassuring, the fact that, okay, those are the books that I'm reading, that I read, that shaped
nice.
me.
That makes me happy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's because there's some time too. I think with either or, maybe a little bit more. Like I think Andre Breton Nadja, nobody reads that anymore. At least in the U.S., nobody reads it, and they're like, "Why is she reading that horrible book?" And it's like, because everyone was reading it in 1995. It's like that's what people were reading.
Yeah, but you know, I love strange books or difficult books. Maybe they will never be your favorite books, but they shaped you as well as your favorite titles. And what's your favorite book? Not your favorite, like the one that you love the most, but the one that influenced you the most.
Like the gateway book for me was Anna Karenina. It's not a very original answer, but it almost feels like an object from nature. Like it doesn't feel like a person made it. I don't know. How about you? What's the most formative book for you?
I'm not gonna be original either, and it's Crime and Punishment.
Oh yeah.
But
how old were you when you read it for the first time?
16.
Oh yeah.
16.
That's the perfect age.
That and I think The Great Gatsby by Francis Scott Fitzgerald.
That's another amazing one.
Yeah,
they're both super gripping. And The Great Gatsby's so short, you don't realize how economical it is.
Yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, it's so dense of symbolism. And again, there are a lot of things that are not written in the words, but are between the words.
See, and they have something in common. They're both sort of exciting and mysterious in the same way, and they have something of like the feeling of youth.
Yes. Idiot and Either Or are both campus novels. What's in the academic life that's so gripping, in your opinion?
Well, I think compared to, I guess Turkey is the country I know the best, but from what I see, Italy also. Compared to other countries in the U.S., the childhood is very sheltered and very, you know, the parents are driving you to this and to that, and you can't go anywhere by yourself, and there's shootings. And it's like a scary. Children are very closely supervised and have very little freedom yet with themselves, or everything's sort of mediated by adults. And then suddenly at 18, it's this, not everyone, but it's like a huge part of the population that like educated people just suddenly go to college and then they live only by themselves in this, which in Turkey it's not the case. The kids sort of have their own life and then they go to college and they usually live at home with their parents. It's not this like drastic thing. I think for me, what's sort of interesting, like there's the moment in Either Or where she's meeting the other students and she's learning that like, she's like, it's as if we were all prisoners in a different facility with different rules and now we're coming together. So it's like, it's this moment where you realize that all of the things that you thought were universal and necessary in everyone's life is like that. You suddenly realize all at once how contingent they are because you're not going in and out of people's houses all the time.
At the end, it's about being young and free to become an adult.
To be young and free, not just free, but also sort of forced to in a weird way, and in this kind of like Lord of the Flies atmosphere where you're thrown together with other people the same age.
Yeah, of course.
It's also quite artificial.
In fact, Celine has to deal with the competition and the fear of rejection and all that in a restricted environment.
And the roommates and the racism and the like, all of this, it's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.